What happens when the foundation of a perfect life is a perfect lie? For Isabella Sterling, wife of billionaire titan Alexander Sterling. Her world was a fairy tale written in gold and diamonds. Pregnant with the heir to a multi-billion-dollar empire, she had everything a woman could desire. But on the very night she felt her baby's first kick, a single phone call shattered her reality. The other woman, the mistress she never knew existed, was in labor. The firstborn Sterling child was coming. But in a twist that would send shockwaves through New York's elite, Alexander made a choice so swift, so ruthless, it defied all expectation. This isn't a story about a man choosing between two women. It's the story of a war fought in secret where a baby is a weapon, and the truth is the most devastating secret of all. The air in the Park Avenue penthouse was always the same, a sterile, climate-controlled 72 degrees, scented with a faint custom blend of white tea and peony. It was the smell of wealth of insulation from the gritty, unpredictable world below. From her vantage point on the 68th floor, Isabella Sterling could see the city lights twinkling like a fallen constellation, a universe away from the turmoil brewing in her heart. Her hand rested on the gentle swell of her stomach, a protective, almost unconscious gesture she'd adopted over the past 7 months. Inside her daughter, their daughter was sleeping. She imagined the tiny heart beating in rhythm with her own, a steady, innocent drumbeat in the cathedral-like silence of their home. This child was supposed to be the final, perfect seal on their perfect life. Alexander Sterling wasn't just a husband. He was an institution, a man whose face graced the cover of Forbes and the Wall Street Journal with unnerving regularity. He'd inherited a formidable real estate empire, and through sheer predatory genius tripled its value before he was 40. He moved through the world with a gravitational pull, all quiet confidence, bespoke Brioni suits, and the ever-present weight of his Patek Philippe. Watch a subtle tick-tock that seemed to count down the millions he made by the minute. To the world and to Isabella, he was magnificent, attentive, generous, and fiercely protective. He'd courted her with the same strategic precision he used for a corporate takeover, sweeping the art curator from the quiet halls of the Met into a life of whirlwind galas, private jets to St. Bart's, and the effortless acquisition of anything her heart desired. She loved him not for the money, but for the moments of perceived vulnerability she saw in his steel-grey eyes when he thought no one was watching. She loved the myth she had built of the man. But myths were fragile things. The distance had been subtle at first. A few more late nights at the office, his explanations vague but plausible. A volatile market in Hong Kong, a sensitive negotiation with a German conglomerate. Then came the hushed phone calls he took on the terrace, his back to her, his voice a low, indecipherable murmur against the wind. The scent of a different perfume, not the Chanel No. 5 of his executive assistant, but something floral, younger and illicit, clinging faintly to his collar one evening. She'd dismissed it all as the paranoia of a hormonal pregnant woman. She was carrying the Sterling heir. She was his wife, the woman he'd chosen, the one whose hand he held at the opera, whose taste he praised in front of ambassadors. She was Isabella Rossi Sterling. She was unshakable. Tonight, the lie she had so carefully told herself crumbled to dust. They'd just returned from a charity dinner at the Frick Collection. Alexander had been the perfect husband. One hand on the small of her back, the other holding a glass of sparkling water for her, his smile as polished as the marble floors. But his eyes were elsewhere. He checked his phone constantly, a nervous energy thrumming just beneath his calm facade. Now, back in the sterile perfection of their home, the tension was a living entity in the room. He loosened his tie, his movements stiff. "Everything all right, darling?" Isabella asked, her voice softer than she intended. "You seemed preoccupied tonight." He turned, and for a second she saw a flicker of something raw in his eyes. Panic or perhaps regret. It was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by his usual mask of control. "Just a complex deal, Izzy. A lot of moving parts. Nothing for you to worry about." He walked to the bar, pouring himself a Macallan 25, the amber liquid catching the light. He never drank whiskey on a weeknight. And then it happened. His phone, a sleek black slab left carelessly on the granite countertop, buzzed. Not a text, but a call. The screen lit up with a name that seared itself into Isabella's mind. Chloe Duval. It wasn't a business name. It wasn't a name she recognized from their social circle. It was a woman's name, simple and devastatingly unfamiliar. Alexander lunged for the phone as if it were a venomous snake, his movements unnaturally fast. He snatched it up his thumb, hovering over the decline button. But he was too late. Isabella had seen it. The name and the picture accompanying it, a young woman with vibrant blonde hair, a spray of freckles across her nose, and eyes that sparkled with a carefree confidence that Isabella hadn't felt in years. "Who is Chloe Duval?" Isabella's voice was a whisper, but it sliced through the silence of the penthouse like a razor. Alexander froze his back to her. The muscles in his shoulders bunched. "It's no one. A wrong number. A wrong number." "You seem desperate to silence." She pressed a cold dread creeping up her spine, chilling her to the bone. She took a step closer. "Alexander, look at me. Who is she?" He wouldn't turn. He just stared at the phone in his hand, as if it held the codes to a nuclear launch. It buzzed again insistently. A text message this time. Chloe Duval. "Alex, my water broke. I'm on my way to Lenox Hill. It's happening now." The message preview flashed on the screen for a mere second, but for Isabella, time seemed to stretch and distort. Each word was a physical blow. "My water broke. Lenox Hill. It's happening now." The room began to tilt. The white tea and peony scent was suddenly cloying, suffocating. She gripped the back of a plush armchair to steady herself, the velvet feeling rough against her trembling fingers. Her water broke. The words came out choked, incredulous. She's having a baby." Finally. Alexander turned. The mask was gone. In its place was a face she'd never seen before. A landscape of guilt, panic, and a chilling, calculated resolve. He didn't deny it. The time for lies was over, and the sheer bluntness of the truth was more brutal than any deception. "Yes," he said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. The single word hung in the air, a death knell for the world Isabella had known. The floor seemed to drop away from beneath her feet. The baby inside her gave a sudden sharp kick, as if sensing its mother's distress. The sensation which usually brought her such joy now felt like a shared pang of betrayal. Our baby." Isabella stammered, her hand flying to her own stomach. "I'm having your baby." Who is she? How long?" "It's complicated, Isabella." "Complicated?" she shrieked, the sound raw and ugly in the pristine room. "Complicated is a bad business deal." Alexander complicated his choosing a caterer. This is a nightmare. His phone rang again. This time he answered it, his voice dropping into a low, commanding tone. I'm on my way. Yes, the private suite is booked under the name Finch. I'll be there in 20 minutes. He was going to her. He was leaving his 7 months pregnant wife to go to the birth of his mistress's child. The realization was so monstrous, so utterly unbelievable, that for a moment Isabella could only stare at him, her mind a white-hot blank. He ended the call and slipped the phone into his pocket. He wouldn't meet her eyes. He walked towards the bedroom, his steps measured and sure. "Where are you going?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. He paused at the threshold, his silhouette framed by the soft light within. "I have to go. You have to go." Her voice cracked with a hysterical laugh that was half sob. "You have a choice, Alexander. You can stay here with your wife, with your child, or you can walk out that door. But if you walk out that door right now, you are making it clear who and what you value." He finally looked at her, and his expression was the most terrifying thing she had ever seen. It was not the look of a man torn between love and lust. It was the look of a strategist assessing a threat, of a CEO managing a crisis. It was cold. It was impersonal. "I'll be back," he said simply, as if he were just stepping out to buy a newspaper. He disappeared into the master suite. Isabella stood frozen, listening to the sounds of him opening a drawer, the jingle of keys, the soft click of his watch being fastened back onto his wrist. He was choosing. He had chosen. He re-emerged moments later, holding a sleek leather briefcase she'd never seen before. He walked past her towards the grand foyer, with its marble floors and imposing mahogany door. He didn't look at her. He didn't say another word. Isabella followed him, her bare feet silent on the cold stone. "Alexander, please." She begged, the last shred of her pride dissolving. "Don't do this. Don't do this to us. To our daughter." He stopped with his hand on the door handle. He turned his head slightly, his profile sharp and unforgiving in the dim light. "This is bigger than you understand, Isabella," he said, his voice low and final. "Lock the door behind me." And then he was gone. The heavy door clicked shut with an air of finality that echoed in the cavernous apartment. The sound bounced off the polished surfaces, off the priceless art and the crystal vases, and settled deep in Isabella's bones. She was alone, utterly and completely alone in their gilded cage, 68 floors above a city that had never felt more hostile. Her perfect life, her perfect husband, her perfect future, all of it had been a lie. And as she slid down the wall, her body racked with sobs that tore from the very depths of her soul, she understood one horrifying truth. Another woman was giving birth to the first sterling heir, and her husband, the man she loved, had gone to be by her side. The war had begun, and she had just become its first casualty. The private birthing suite at Lenox Hill Hospital was a world away from the clinical chaos of the main maternity ward. It was decorated in muted tones of cream and sage green, with plush armchairs and a flat-screen television displaying a serene image of a waterfall. It smelled of lavender and antiseptic. To Chloe Duvall, it was the finish line. Sweat beaded on her forehead, mingling with tears of pain and exhilaration. Every contraction was a wave of fire, but she rode each one with a grim sense of triumph. This pain was productive. This pain was purpose. For 9 months, she had been Alexander Sterling's secret, a carefully guarded liability. Tonight, She was giving him something his perfect porcelain wife could not yet give him, a son, his firstborn. She had met Alexander at an art auction, a world she'd navigated with a hustler's ambition. She wasn't a blue-blooded heiress like Isabella. She was a self-made gallery assistant with a sharp eye and an even sharper understanding of what powerful men wanted. She hadn't just offered him her body. She'd offered him an escape. With her, he wasn't the titan of industry. He was just Alex. They'd talked about art, about philosophy, about dreams he'd had before the empire consumed him. He'd made her believe she was the only one who saw the real him. When she'd told him she was pregnant, a calculated risk after a forgotten birth control pill. She saw the flicker of panic in his eyes, but it was quickly replaced by something else, a possessive, almost primal pride. He'd set her up in a luxury apartment in the West Village, paid her expenses, and visited her in stolen hours cloaked in darkness. He'd promised her in hushed tones that he would handle the situation with Isabella. Chloe interpreted that, as he saw fit, that he would leave his wife for the mother of his son. Now, as the final agonizing push began, she clung to that belief. The doctor, a renowned obstetrician named Alistair Finch, whose exorbitant fees Alexander had paid without blinking, offered calm encouragement. One more, Chloe. The head is crowning. One more big push. With a final guttural cry, her son entered the world. The room was filled with his lusty, indignant wail. The nurse cleaned him quickly and laid him on Chloe's chest. He was perfect. A shock of dark hair just like Alexander's, and tiny clenched fists. She looked at his face, searching for a sign, a confirmation of her victory. She would name him Leo, a lion, the king of the jungle. Leo Sterling, she whispered, tears of joy and relief streaming down her face. It was in this moment of pure, unadulterated triumph that Alexander Sterling walked in. He didn't look like a man rushing to the side of his newborn son. He looked like a man arriving at a hostile board meeting. He wore the same immaculate suit from the gala, his tie perfectly knotted. He carried the black leather briefcase. His face was an unreadable mask of granite. He stopped several feet from the bed, his grey eyes sweeping the scene with a cold, analytical gaze. He looked at the baby on her chest, then at Chloe, and then at Dr. Finch. "Is the child healthy?" he asked, his voice cutting through the warm, emotional atmosphere like a shard of ice. Dr. Finch, taken aback by the man's detached demeanour, nodded. "Perfectly, Mr. Sterling. 8 pounds 2 ounces. Apgar scores of 9 and 9. Alexander gave a curt nod. He did not step closer. He did not ask to hold his son. Chloe's heart, which had been soaring, began to plummet. This was not the reunion she had imagined. Where was the tender kiss? The emotional tears, the whispered promises of their new life together? "Alex," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Come meet him. Come meet our son." Alexander's eyes finally settled on hers. The warmth she had cherished during their secret nights together was gone. In its place was a chillingly polite distance. "We need to talk, Chloe," he said, gesturing for the nurse and doctor to give them privacy. Dr. Finch, looking uncomfortable, quickly ushered the nurse out, closing the door softly behind them. Alexander walked over to one of the plush armchairs, placing the briefcase on the small table beside it. He opened it with a series of precise clicks. It did not contain baby clothes or a celebratory bottle of champagne. It contained documents, stacks of them bound in crisp legal blue. "What is this?" Chloe asked, clutching Leo tighter. A primitive fear began to replace her euphoria. "This, Alexander," said his voice, level and devoid of all emotion, "is the conclusion of our arrangement." He slid a sheaf of papers across the table. "This is a settlement agreement. It's quite generous. It provides you with ownership of the West Village apartment, free and clear. It establishes a trust fund for the child in the amount of $25 million to be managed by my family office. It will cover all his living and educational expenses through to his postgraduate studies. You will also receive a personal annuity of $500,000 a year for life." Chloe stared at him, her mind struggling to process his words. A settlement, an arrangement. He spoke as if he were closing a real estate deal, not discussing the birth of their child. "I don't understand," she whispered. "What about you? What about us?" Alexander leaned back in the chair, steepling his fingers. It was a pose of absolute power and control. "There is no us, Chloe. There never was. You were a diversion. A pleasant one for a time, but a diversion nonetheless." The cruelty of his words was breathtaking. Every intimate moment, every shared secret, every whispered promise, all of it had been a lie. A transaction. "But the baby," she stammered, looking down at the innocent child in her arms. "Our son. He's your firstborn. The first sterling of his generation. He is a child who will be exceptionally well provided for." Alexander corrected her, his tone sharpening slightly. "But he will not be a sterling in name. That is one of the conditions. He will bear your surname. He will not be my heir. He will have no claim on the Sterling Corporation or my personal estate. My heir will be the child my wife is carrying. My legal legitimate child." The emphasis he placed on the word wife was like a slap in the face. Isabella. The pale, elegant woman he was supposed to be leaving. "You're choosing her?" Chloe asked, her voice rising with disbelief and fury. "You're choosing your pregnant wife and her baby over me, over your son. I gave birth first. He's here. He's real. This was never a choice between you and Isabella," Alexander said, standing up. The air of civility dropped, replaced by an aura of pure, intimidating authority. "You fundamentally misunderstand your position. My life, my legacy, my empire, it is all tied to my family, and my family is with my wife. You were a complication I have now contained." He pushed another document towards her. "This is a non-disclosure agreement. It is ironclad. You will never contact me, my wife, or any member of my family or business again. You will never speak of our association. If you violate it in any way, all financial support will cease immediately, and I will use the full force of my legal power to take custody of the child, citing your instability and breach of contract." He was not just leaving her, he was erasing her. He was buying her silence, walling her and his son off in a gilded prison while he returned to his real life. The baby in her arms wasn't a trump card. He was a liability to be managed. Tears of rage and heartbreak streamed down Chloe's face. "You bastard," she hissed. "You used me." "Yes," he said, without a hint of remorse. "And you attempted to use me. You thought a baby would secure you a position in my life. It was a bold move, but a miscalculation. You aimed for the throne and ended up with a payoff. It's more than most people get." He glanced at his Patek Philippe. "My lawyers will be in contact with yours to finalize the paperwork. A car will be waiting for you upon your discharge." He turned to leave, having never once touched his son. "Alexander, wait!" Chloe cried out a last, desperate plea. "Just look at him. Please. He has your eyes." Alexander paused at the door, his back to her. For a long, agonizing moment, he stood perfectly still. Chloe held her breath, hoping for a crack in his armor, a flicker of fatherly love. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, but it held the finality of a death sentence. "My wife is waiting for me," he said. "That is where my focus lies. That is where my future is. I suggest you focus on yours." He opened the door and walked out, leaving Chloe Duvall alone in the lavender-scented suite with her multi-million-dollar settlement and a baby who had a father, but would never have a dad. The triumphant cries of her newborn son now sounded like a mournful wail. She had gambled everything and lost in the most spectacular way imaginable. She hadn't won a king. She had been paid off like a commoner, while Alexander Sterling, without a moment's hesitation, returned to protect his queen and the true heir to his throne. The click of the penthouse door opening was a sound that made Isabella's heart leap into her throat. She had spent the last 3 hours in a state of suspended agony, curled on a sofa in the cavernous living room, a cashmere throw clutched around her like a shield. She hadn't cried since her initial gut-wrenching breakdown. A cold, brittle anger had taken its place. Alexander stepped inside, looking just as immaculate as when he had left. There was no sign of the emotional turmoil of childbirth on his face. No joy, no exhaustion. He looked like a man who had successfully concluded a difficult transaction. He placed the black leather briefcase on the floor and loosened his tie, his eyes finally meeting hers across the vast expanse of the room. "Isabella," he began, his voice quiet. Don't she cut him off, her own voice, sharp and steady. "Don't you dare come in here and say my name as if you haven't just shattered our entire life. Is she okay? Is your child okay?" She spat the word child as if it were poison. Alexander walked further into the room, stopping a respectful distance away. "The mother and child are healthy," good Isabella said with a chilling lack of emotion. "Then you have your heir, your firstborn." "Congratulations, Alexander. I assume my services are no longer required." "That's not what this is," he said, taking another step closer. "Izzy, please. Let me explain." Explain what she shot back, rising to her feet, her pregnant belly a prominent symbol of his betrayal. "Explain how you looked me in the eye and lied to me for months. Explain how you left your pregnant wife to be at the birth of your mistress's baby. There are no words in the English language that can explain that, Alexander. There is only the fact of it." "I came back," he said, his voice laced with an earnestness that almost sounded real. "I was there for less than an hour. I handled it. And I came back home. To you. Doesn't that tell you anything?" "It tells me you have an excellent sense of damage control," she retorted. "What did you do? Pay her off? Threaten her? Set her and your bastard child up in a secret love nest somewhere?" "I have ended the arrangement," he said, his jaw tight. "I have made it unequivocally clear that my life is here with you, with our daughter. What happened with Chloe was a mistake, a grave error in judgment. But it's over." He tried to reach for her hand, but she snatched it away as if his touch would burn her. Over, she laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. "A child was just born, Alexander. a child that shares your blood. It is never going to be over. It will be a shadow that hangs over us, over our daughter for the rest of our lives. I chose you, he insisted, his grey eyes boring into hers. When it came down to it, there was no hesitation. I chose this family. I chose our future. I am begging you, Isabella, to let us find a way to move past this. For the first time since he'd walked in, she saw a crack in his composure, a desperation. He looked at her stomach, at the child they had created together, and his expression softened into something that resembled genuine remorse. It was this flicker of the man she thought she knew, the man she loved, that sowed a tiny, treacherous seed of doubt in her heart. Was it possible? Could a man make such a catastrophic mistake and still ultimately choose the right path? Her mind screamed no, but her heart, foolish and broken, whispered maybe. She was pregnant, emotional and terrifyingly alone. The thought of navigating this world without him, of raising a child amidst the scandal of a public divorce, was a chasm of fear. I need time, she whispered, her anger deflating into exhaustion. I don't know what I need, but I can't look at you right now. She turned and walked towards their bedroom, a sanctuary that now felt tainted. She closed the door behind her, leaving him standing alone in the monument to their broken marriage. For the next 2 weeks they lived as ghosts in the penthouse. They slept in separate rooms. They spoke only when necessary, their conversations stilted and formal. Alexander was a model of contrition. He cancelled all his evening meetings. He brought her breakfast in bed, which she barely touched. He sat with her in silence for hours, as if his mere presence could atone for his sins. Isabella, meanwhile, felt like she was drowning. The betrayal was a constant physical ache in her chest. She wanted to believe his words, to accept his choice to return to her as proof of his love. But a nagging, insidious thought kept her from succumbing. Alexander Sterling did nothing without a reason. His actions were always calculated, his motives layered. Why had his choice been so swift, so ruthless? It felt less like a man following his heart, and more like a king sacrificing a pawn to save his queen. But why was the pawn, his own son, so easily disposable? The doubt festered. It was this doubt that led her to make a call she never thought she would have to. She called Marco Diaz, a man who worked in the shadowy world of private investigation. He was discreet, expensive, and ruthlessly effective, a name she'd overheard at a cocktail party, once filed away for a rainy day she never thought would come. The storm had arrived. I want to know everything about a woman named Chloe Duval. Isabella told him, her voice low and steady over the encrypted line. Her history, her associates, her financials, everything, especially over the last year. Marco, a professional to his core, asked no personal questions. It will be done, Mrs. Sterling. A week later, an encrypted file arrived in her private email. Isabella opened it in the dead of night, while Alexander slept in the guest room down the hall. Her hands trembled as she clicked through the contents. The file was thorough. It detailed Chloe's modest upbringing, her ambition, her swift climb through the lower rungs of the New York art scene. It showed the sudden massive influx of cash into her accounts 9 months ago. It had photos of her entering and leaving the West Village apartment, and clandestine shots of Alexander visiting late at night. It was all there, a sordid, painful confirmation of the affair. But then Isabella saw something that made the blood drain from her face. It was in a subfolder titled Known Associates and Communications. Marco's team had hacked Chloe's phone records and social media. Most of it was mundane, but one recurring contact stood out: a series of calls and encrypted messages to and from a number registered to a shell corporation. A shell corporation that Marco, with his considerable resources, had traced back to one man, Marcus Thorne. The name hit Isabella like a physical blow. Marcus Thorne was not just a business rival to Alexander. He was a nemesis. Years ago, Thorne and Sterling had been locked in a brutal battle for a massive downtown development project. Alexander had won, not just by outbidding Thorne, but by exposing a bribery scandal that had nearly landed Thorne in prison and left his company in ruins. Thorne had lost everything: his fortune, his reputation, his marriage. He had vanished from the New York scene, a ghost rumored to be nursing a vendetta of epic proportions. Why in God's name was Chloe Duval, Alexander's mistress, in contact with Marcus Thorne? Isabella scrolled further, her heart hammering against her ribs. There were financial records. A large, untraceable payment had been made from another of Thorne's offshore accounts to Chloe, just days before she announced her pregnancy to Alexander. The pieces began to click into place, forming a picture so sinister, so diabolical, that Isabella felt sick to her stomach. This wasn't a simple affair. Chloe hadn't been a mere opportunist who got lucky. She was a plant, a honey trap deployed by Marcus Thorne to infiltrate Alexander's life. The baby. Leo. He wasn't just the product of an illicit romance. He was a weapon, a Trojan horse designed to destroy the House of Sterling from within. Thorne's plan was suddenly terrifyingly clear. He would have Chloe give birth to Alexander's son. Then he would have her file a massive public paternity suit. The ensuing scandal would paint Alexander as an adulterous, immoral monster. It would rock the Sterling Corporation's stock, create turmoil among the board members, and make the company vulnerable. It was the perfect moment for a weakened, vengeful Marcus Thorne to initiate a hostile takeover using the chaos as cover. He wasn't just aiming for revenge. He was aiming to seize the entire bar using Alexander's own blood against him. Isabella leaned back, her mind reeling. She looked at the last attachment in the file. It was a grainy photograph, taken with a long-lens camera 2 days ago. It was of Chloe Duval, pushing a stroller in Central Park. She was not alone. Sitting on the bench next to her, his face a mask of smug satisfaction, was Marcus Thorne. He was looking down at the baby in the stroller, and the expression on his face was not one of affection. It was the look of a man admiring his masterwork, his perfect tool of vengeance. A chilling realization washed over Isabella. Alexander's swift, brutal dismissal of Chloe and the baby. It wasn't a choice between his wife and his mistress. It was a calculated corporate maneuver. He wasn't choosing love. He was neutralizing a threat. But did he know about Thorne's involvement? Or had he simply, by pure, cold-hearted instinct, cut out a potential problem before it could fester? The question hung in the air, heavy and menacing. Her husband was not just an adulterer. He was a man caught in a deadly game of corporate espionage, a game where his own child was a pawn. And he had brought that war into their home, into her life, placing her and their unborn daughter squarely in the crossfire without her even knowing it. The betrayal now had a new, more terrifying dimension. It wasn't just about infidelity. It was about a secret war he had been fighting, and she had been nothing but a piece on the board. Her anger returned no longer brittle, but forged into something hard and sharp as steel. She closed the laptop. She now understood the game, and she would not be a pawn in it any longer. The silence in Alexander's home office was a weapon in itself. Isabella had chosen the battlefield with meticulous care. This room, with its dark mahogany walls lined with leather-bound books he'd never read, its scent of old money and ruthless ambition, was the very heart of his power. Tonight, she intended to stage a coup. She stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, the city lights of Manhattan sprawling below her like a diamond-encrusted web. She was not looking at the view. Her focus was inward on the cold, hard knot of fury and clarity that had settled where her grief used to be. For 2 weeks she had been a ghost in her own home, a study in quiet suffering. But Marco Diaz's encrypted file had been a transfusion of ice into her veins. The pain of the betrayed wife had been supplanted by the cold rage of a queen who discovers the entire war was fought in her name, but without her knowledge. When she heard his footsteps approaching, she didn't turn. The door opened and closed softly. Isabella Alexander's voice was cautious, laced with the gentle, penitent tone he had adopted for weeks. He likely saw her standing here, ready to talk, as a sign of a thaw, a step towards the forgiveness he so desperately seemed to want. "I was just admiring the view," she said, her voice deceptively calm. She turned slowly, her eyes meeting his. "It's remarkable, isn't it? How from this high up you can't see the dirt in the streets. You can't see the struggles, the little betrayals happening in every building. Everything looks clean, perfect, and under control." A flicker of unease crossed his face. This was not the broken woman he had been tending to. "Izzy, what's this about?" "It's about control." "Alexander," she continued, taking a step towards his massive, imposing desk. She ran a hand over the cool, polished wood. "Your favorite thing. You control markets, you control companies, you control people. I'm just wondering, how does it feel when you lose it?" "I haven't lost control," he said, his tone hardening slightly, the mask of the remorseful husband beginning to slip. "No." "Then you should have no problem explaining this." She didn't just show him the photograph. She began her assault with surgical precision. First, she placed a printed summary of Chloe Duvall's phone records on the desk. "These are calls made to a shell corporation, a rather clever one, I'll admit." Next, she laid down a bank statement summary. "And this is a payment of $250,000 transferred to Chloe just before she got pregnant. The payment was routed through the Cayman Islands, but its origin is the same as the owner of that shell corporation." Alexander's face had become a thundercloud. He stood frozen, watching her as she built her case against him, against the secret world he'd tried so hard to conceal. Finally, she placed the grainy photograph on top of the pile. Chloe Duvall, Marcus Thorne, the baby. And this is the man behind it all. Marcus Thorne, your ghost of corporate battles past, smiling at your firstborn son as if he were admiring a prize-winning racehorse, or perhaps a weapon he had commissioned himself. The name Thorne was the final blow. Alexander stared at the evidence, his jaw tight enough to crack stone. The charade was over. There was no room left for lies. This wasn't an accusation born of jealousy. It was an indictment built on facts. How he finally ground out his voice, a low growl of disbelief. "My security team is the best in the world. How did you get this?" "You seem to forget, Alexander, that I lived in the real world before you bought it for me." "I still have my own resources," she said icily. The lie was satisfying, let him think she was more formidable than she was. But that isn't the question you should be asking. The question is, did you know? When you walked out that door, leaving me here, bleeding my heart out on the floor, did you know you were walking into a trap set by your greatest enemy? He sank into his heavy leather chair, the fight draining out of him replaced by a profound weariness. He looked up at her, and the truth was there in his exhausted steel-grey eyes. Yes, he admitted the word a confession of sins far greater than mere adultery. I knew. Isabella felt a tremor of shock despite having suspected it. To hear him admit it was something else entirely. You knew. He leaned forward, elbows on his desk, burying his face in his hands for a moment, before looking back up his expression, one of grim resolve. I've known for months, not from the beginning, but long before the end. Chloe. She got careless. Too many questions about the board, too much interest in the finer points of our Q3 earnings report. It was unnatural. It felt rehearsed. He explained how he'd tasked his security head, Elias Vance, with a discreet but total investigation. They'd bugged her apartment, tracked her communications. They uncovered the link to Thorne about 3 months ago. They watched as Thorne coached her, fed her information, and helped orchestrate the final act. His plan was brilliant in its own sociopathic way. Alexander continued his voice, taking on the detached, analytical tone he used in boardrooms. The paternity suit was the public spectacle, but the real attack was financial. A morals clause with our Japanese investors, a multi-billion-dollar funding line, is tied directly to my personal conduct. A scandal involving a secret child would have triggered it. The stock would have plummeted by 30, maybe 40% in a day. And Thorne, with his new backers, would have been waiting to launch a hostile takeover, buying up a controlling interest for pennies on the dollar. He wasn't just going to hurt me, is he? He was going to decapitate the Sterling Corporation and wear its crown. He spoke of it with a chilling, almost academic detachment. Isabella listened horrified and mesmerized in equal measure. This was the real Alexander Sterling, the predator she had fallen in love with, the man who saw the world as a chessboard. So you played along. She breathed, the pieces connecting in her mind. You knew the baby was a weapon, and you let her give birth to it. I had to let the threat fully manifest before I could neutralize it completely, he said. If I had exposed her early, Thorne would have just denied it created a different kind of scandal. No, I had to let him think his plan was working perfectly. I had to let the child be born. And your grand performance at the hospital? She asked, her voice dripping with sarcasm. The cold dismissal, the generous but airtight settlement, the non-disclosure agreement that could survive a nuclear blast. That wasn't a man choosing his wife. That was a king executing a traitor. It was the only move I had. He insisted, standing now, his voice rising with passion. I had to legally and financially sever him from me in a way that was absolute. By creating a generous, legally binding trust and an NDA, I stripped Thorne of his weapon. Any attempt to sue me now would be a clear violation, giving me grounds to counter-sue them into oblivion and take the child. I turned his Trojan horse into an empty wooden shell. The sheer, cold-blooded brilliance of it was staggering. He had faced down the greatest threat to his empire, a threat aimed at his very heart, and he had dismantled it with the precision of a bomb disposal expert. But his victory came at a terrible price, and Isabella's voice trembled no longer with rage, but with a profound, soul-deep hurt. What was I in this grand strategy of yours, Alexander? Was I the queen you were protecting? Or was I just the castle, the territory you had to defend? You let me believe the most degrading lie imaginable. You let me think I was losing my husband to a cheap affair. You watched me break day after day, and you said nothing. You didn't protect me. You managed me. You kept your asset calm and in the dark because it was better for your strategy. I did it to keep you safe. He thundered, striding around the desk to stand before her. Thorn is a viper. If he knew that you knew, he could have come after you, after our daughter. Everything I did, the lies, the secrecy, all of it was to build a firewall around you. It was my only priority. That was not your decision to make, she cried out. It's my life. My child. I had a right to know what kind of war we were in. As her voice rose, a searing white-hot pain shot through her, so intense it stole her breath. She gasped, doubling over her hands, flying to her heavily pregnant belly. Alexander's fury vanished in an instant, replaced by raw, undiluted panic. Isabella. What is it? What's wrong? Pain, she breathed, trying to straighten up as the contraction subsided, leaving her trembling. I think it's just stress. But another wave began to build a powerful, deep clenching that radiated from her back. It was undeniable. Real. This was not stress. This was labor. Her eyes locked with his, wide with shock and fear. And then the final, unmistakable sign. The warm gush of her water breaking, soaking through her dress, a shockingly primal event in the cold, corporate sanctum of his office. Alexander. She whispered, her voice a mix of terror and awe. It's time. The baby. She's coming. In that moment, Alexander Sterling, the CEO, the strategist, the ruthless warrior, ceased to exist. He became just a man, terrified and completely out of his depth. The chessboard was wiped clean. The game was over. A new, far more important reality had just asserted itself. Okay, he said, his voice shaking as he guided her into a chair. Okay. We're okay. He was talking to himself as much as to her. He fumbled for his phone, his hands that could sign multi-billion-dollar deals now struggling to dial their doctor. The hours that followed were a surreal fusion of agony and intimacy. In the back of the Maybach, speeding towards Lenox Hill, Isabella gripped his hand. Her knuckles white, her world narrowed to the rhythm of the contractions. All the lies and betrayals that had separated them just moments before were burned away by the sheer overwhelming force of childbirth. There was no room for anything else. He was by her side constantly, a stark contrast to his clinical detached visit for his other child's birth. He was her anchor. He breathed with her, his face a mask of concern, his eyes never leaving hers. He saw her pain, her strength, her fear, and it was reflected in his own expression. In the brightly lit delivery room, as Isabella gave her final monumental push, a new life entered their fractured world. A daughter. Perfect and screaming with a full head of dark hair, and eyes that when they finally opened were the same startling steel grey as her father's. The nurse laid the baby on Isabella's chest. The tiny warm weight was grounding a miracle amidst the wreckage. Serafina. Isabella wept a sound of pure, unadulterated relief and love. Alexander leaned over them, his own tears falling freely onto the blanket, heedless of his image. He reached out a trembling finger and stroked his daughter's cheek. He looked from Serafina to Isabella, his eyes raw with an emotion that was too profound for words, a mix of gratitude, awe, and a regret so deep it seemed to carve new lines into his face. "Forgive me, Izzy," he choked out. "Please." Looking at him, then stripped bare of all his power and arrogance, Isabella knew their old life was gone forever. Forgiveness was a distant country she wasn't sure she could ever reach. But as she held their daughter, their true heir, she understood that their future was not about going back. It was about building something new on the ruins of the old. A fortress. The aftermath was as silent and swift as a guillotine. Using the trove of evidence, Alexander didn't just defeat Marcus Thorne. He erased him. A series of anonymous data leaks to financial regulators and Thorne's own partners triggered investigations that dismantled his shadow empire. He vanished into a mire of litigation and ruin, a ghost for the second and final time. Chloe Duval and her son Leo quietly left the country beneficiaries of a war they never understood their silence bought and paid for. Life in the park. Avenue Penthouse found a new rhythm. It was a quiet life. The trust that had been shattered was not magically restored, but it was slowly, painstakingly being rebuilt on a new foundation, one not of fairy tale love, but of brutal honesty and shared survival. Theirs was no longer a marriage of equals in love, but a partnership of sovereigns in power. One evening a week later, Isabella was rocking Serafina in the nursery. Alexander stood in the doorway, just watching them. "She looks like you," he said softly. "She has your eyes," Isabella replied, not looking up. "She will see everything. We won't be able to hide anything from her." It wasn't an accusation. It was a statement of fact, a new term for their treaty. He nodded, understanding her meaning completely. "No more secrets, Izzy. From this day forward, we fight our wars together." She finally looked up at him, her gaze clear and steady. She was no longer just his wife. She was his ally, his counsel, the co-ruler of their sterling dynasty. She had been tested by fire and had not burned, and in her arms she held the future. She had won. In the end, the war for the Sterling Empire was won not in a boardroom, but in the heart of a family pushed to its absolute limit. Alexander Sterling's choice was never about one woman over another. It was a ruthless, strategic move to protect his legacy. But in doing so, he almost lost the one thing his money could never buy back: the trust of his wife. Isabella, once a sheltered wife, emerged as a queen in her own right, proving that strength isn't about the absence of betrayal, but how you rise from its ashes. Their story is a chilling reminder that in the world of the ultra-wealthy, love, loyalty, and even children can become weapons in a silent war for power. What do you think? Was Alexander's choice a sign of ultimate love for his family, or the coldest calculation of a corporate titan? Can a marriage built on such a devastating secret truly survive? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below.
Millionaire promised the world to his mistress but forgot his pregnant wife's birthday. Meet Alexander Van Doren, a self-made millionaire, so used to getting everything he wants that he's forgotten how much it costs others. His life is a tapestry of luxurious galas, glittering diamonds, and secret rendezvous. But beneath the polished veneer, he's about to discover that a man who can buy the world might lose what truly matters most. Driven by obsession, he dares to promise the world to his radiant mistress, all while ignoring the quiet heartbreak of his pregnant wife. When a forgotten birthday sets off a chain of cataclysmic events, Alexander's world careens toward disaster. Secrets will unravel, loyalties will shatter, and no amount of money can save him now. Alexander Van Doren was, by all appearances, the perfect portrait of success. He was lean, tall, and strikingly handsome, with sharp blue eyes that seemed to pierce through whoever stood before him. His family name carried weight, but his true fortune was self-made, a sprawling real estate empire built upon a single risky investment he'd made at just 24 years old. By 30, he had multiplied that fortune 100-fold. Now, at 36, he was poised to double it yet again. He lived in the affluent enclave of Westbridge Hills, where gated mansions lined the streets like jewels in a crown. Neighbors spoke his name in hushed tones, a mix of envy and admiration. He had everything he wanted, or so it seemed. The truth was, in the silent corners of his life, dissatisfaction brewed like a storm. Alexander craved excitement, an addiction to adrenaline, and the thrill of conquering every obstacle. His wife, Catherine Van Doren, was the epitome of dignity and grace. Once an aspiring poet, she had traded her ambitions for the life of a corporate wife, attending charity events and nodding dutifully by her husband's side. Despite her own silent yearnings, Catherine held steadfastly to love and loyalty. She was 9 months pregnant with their first child, her belly a gentle curve that symbolized a long, cherished dream, but the glow that once marked her features had dimmed in recent months, replaced by worry lines carved from loneliness and suspicion. The tension in the mansion was palpable. Lately, Alexander had seemed preoccupied, spending many nights in his study or at business meetings. Catherine had begun to wonder, had she done something wrong? Was the pregnancy too much for him? Or perhaps there was someone else occupying that space in his heart. She tried to dismiss the thought, but women's intuition rarely lies dormant for long. Then came an innocent hint of reality that Catherine couldn't ignore. One night, while searching for her car keys, she found a receipt for an extremely expensive bracelet in Alexander's jacket pocket. Engraved on it was a message that read, "For my shining star, A.V." Now, Catherine's name had no V in it, and though the initials matched her husband, the note looked suspiciously intimate. Panic churned inside her, but she told herself it could be for business, perhaps a thank you gift for an investor or something along those lines. Yet the seed of doubt took root. In the days that followed, Catherine became more observant. She noticed Alexander's phone lighting up late at night with texts from someone named AP. She noticed the hush in his voice whenever he answered these calls. She felt the distance, colder than any winter frost, growing between them. But still, she tried to hope, to believe that once the baby arrived, everything would fall back into place. Little did she know, that delicate facade of normalcy was on the brink of shattering, sending the Van Doren household into turmoil from which it might never recover. Anastasia Pierce was Alexander's secret, a secret that roared like a wildfire beneath the surface of his otherwise controlled existence. She was a striking woman with raven hair and emerald green eyes that seemed to sparkle with mischievous curiosity. In many ways, she was the polar opposite of Catherine, yet she carried a certain allure that Alexander found irresistible. They'd met 6 months ago at a fund-raising gala for the Westbridge Hills Arts Council, a place Alexander had attended more out of obligation than genuine interest. Yet upon spotting Anastasia across the room, her laughter echoing, her slender figure accentuated by a simple but elegant black dress, he'd felt a spark he could not ignore. Their first encounter was innocent enough. She'd merely introduced herself, praising his charitable contributions to local youth art programs. One drink led to another, and conversation flowed like a well-aged wine. Soon they were meeting under hushed arrangements at an upscale lounge downtown, away from the prying eyes of Westbridge Hills. They told themselves it was just a harmless flirtation, but lines blurred quickly. Anastasia was no naive college girl enamored by wealth. She was a sophisticated woman who had carved a path in the art world, curating exhibitions and traveling extensively. She was used to attention and men with money. Yet something about Alexander tugged at her heartstrings more intensely than she'd anticipated. Perhaps it was the subtle vulnerability lurking behind his confident exterior, or maybe it was his magnetic aura of possibility. He made lavish promises, whispered in her ear about a future filled with travel, romance, and a place of her own in his heart. She believed, or at least wanted to believe, that these promises were real. But as the months unfolded, Anastasia found herself catching glimpses of Alexander's deeper complexities, his restlessness, his unspoken burdens, and the ring that still glinted on his left hand whenever he forgot to take it off in her presence. She often wondered about Catherine, but Alexander's dismissals were always the same. It's complicated. She doesn't understand me like you do, or we're practically living separate lives now. He insisted a divorce was on the horizon, painting an image of a marriage that was more a business arrangement than a union of hearts. Stolen weekends in Montauk, secret lunches in hidden bistros, midnight phone calls brimming with passion. It was easy for Anastasia to lose herself in the fantasy. She craved the adrenaline too, thriving on the illicit thrill, but deep down, she yearned for stability. She wanted to be more than just a hidden mistress. She believed Alexander when he promised that soon it would just be the two of them. Now, with Catherine's pregnancy nearing its final weeks, the pressure mounted. Alexander was starting to show signs of agitation. He was jumpy, glancing at his phone every few minutes, always on alert. Anastasia felt the simmer of urgency in their conversations, as if a storm was about to break, yet she held fast to the illusions he'd spun around her. After all, he was Alexander Van Doren, the brilliant millionaire who had never failed in any venture. If anyone could make impossible dreams come true, it had to be him. What she didn't know was that behind the bravado, Alexander was dancing on thin ice, and every step threatened to plunge them all into the freezing darkness beneath. Back at the Van Doren mansion, the tension thickened with every passing day. Catherine's due date edged closer, and with it came a surge of emotional fragility. She found herself fending off swirling anxieties about motherhood, about her marriage, and about the unspeakable secret she feared might be unfolding before her very eyes. She tried to confront Alexander at dinner one night, choosing her words carefully, desperate for reassurance. "Alex," she began softly, tracing the rim of her glass of water, "I feel like we're drifting. Is something on your mind?" He looked up from his phone, seemingly startled. "What makes you say that?" "I've just been busy at work. You know how it is," he replied, offering the faintest of smiles. His eyes, however, revealed no warmth. Catherine pressed on, uncertain if she should mention the bracelet receipt or the mysterious late-night texts. But she stopped short, her heart hammered, fearing that speaking the words aloud would make them irrevocably real. She settled instead for a whispered question. "Don't you think we should spend more time together before the baby arrives? Maybe a short trip, just us?" Alexander grimaced slightly. The very thought of stepping away from his swirling entanglements, business deals, his affair, seemed like a burden. "We'll have time," he said tersely, returning his attention to his phone as if the conversation had already ended. That night, Catherine wept silently in bed while Alexander dozed off in his office, lulled by spreadsheets and clandestine messages from Anastasia. The future that once promised warmth and familial bliss was turning cold. If only Catherine had known how complicated things were behind the scenes. Days later, an ominous cloud settled over Westbridge Hills, literally and figuratively. A slow-moving storm churned in the Atlantic, threatening to drench the coastline in torrential rain. The local news couldn't stop warning about flash floods and hurricane-force winds. Yet the warnings did little to shift the course of the emotional storm taking shape within the Van Doren circle. For while Catherine was preparing for a baby, Anastasia was preparing to claim what she believed was rightfully hers. She'd grown restless with Alexander's excuses. Why did he refuse to make their relationship public? Why did he keep delaying the big talk about leaving Catherine? The frustration swelled into resentment, and resentment gave birth to bold decisions. Late one evening, she texted Alexander, "Anastasia, we need to talk, face to face. I want answers." But answers were not something Alexander was prepared to give just yet. His business deals were teetering on critical negotiations. A lucrative land development near Charleston was about to net him tens of millions. He needed to maintain focus, to keep his composure. He responded curtly, "Alexander, soon, my star, I promise. Just need to wrap up a few things." Anastasia read the message and felt a swirl of conflicting emotions: hope, anger, longing. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being strung along. Perhaps it was time to make Alexander see that she wasn't a mere accessory. Maybe she should make a bold appearance at the Van Doren mansion or confront him at his office. But would that risk losing him entirely? Fear and determination wrestled in her mind. Meanwhile, Catherine found herself alone in the mansion more often. She tried to distract herself by tidying the nursery, a serene space painted in soft green, with a crib made from the finest wood. But emptiness lingered in every corner of that grand house. She quietly decided that if Alexander wouldn't share his burdens with her, she'd uncover the truth on her own. Little did any of them realize that the approaching literal storm was merely a harbinger of the chaos and heartbreak that awaited. Catherine's birthday arrived on a day marked by incessant rainfall. Wind whipped the trees in the Van Doren estate's expansive garden, scattering leaves across the marble driveway. The storm had intensified overnight, and the weather mirrored Catherine's inner turmoil. She'd never been one to demand grand gestures or expensive gifts. A simple, heartfelt acknowledgement would have sufficed. In years past, Alexander would lavish her with roses, jewelry, or romantic dinners in five-star restaurants. They would dance, laugh, and talk about their shared dreams. Yet this year, as the sun struggled to break through the storm clouds, there was no sign of Alexander. Not even a text message. Catherine rose early, heart fluttering with a faint optimism. Perhaps he planned a surprise? She had to allow him that benefit of the doubt. She showered, dressed in a loose, comfortable sweater that stretched over her pregnant belly, and tiptoed downstairs. The house was silent, echoing her hopes back to her in empty hushes. By mid-morning, her phone remained quiet. No calls, no texts, just the relentless pounding of the rain on the windows. She sipped tea alone in the spacious living room, trying not to let her tears overflow. The day dragged on, each hour a cruel reminder that the man she loved was too lost in his own world to remember something as simple as her birthday. And where was Alexander? He was in an upscale penthouse suite downtown, far from the prying eyes of Westbridge Hills. A last-minute business conference call had turned into a celebratory lunch with potential investors. And that lunch turned into an impromptu dinner. Throughout it all, he was accompanied by Anastasia. She'd demanded a face-to-face meeting to discuss their future, and Alexander, hoping to placate her, invited her to the city under the guise of business. In the plush intimacy of that penthouse, they shared whispered confidences and sipped champagne. Anastasia prodded him about the timeline for his divorce, pressing harder than she ever had before. Her green eyes burned with resolve. "You keep saying you'll leave Catherine. You said you'd do it before the baby arrived, so we could start our life. But time's running out, Alexander." He swallowed hard, scanning the room as if searching for an exit. "Things are complicated, Anna. "You know that," he said, employing the gentle tone he used whenever he tried to calm her. "Once this business deal closes, I'll make the final move, I promise." Thunder rumbled in the distance, lightning splitting the sky. A flicker of guilt surfaced in Alexander's eyes, but he quickly suppressed it. His phone buzzed on the coffee table, but he ignored it. He was too ensnared by Anastasia's allure, too intoxicated by the escape she provided. He never once glanced at the date or realized its importance. Even as night fell, Catherine's phone remained silent of any birthday wishes from her husband. Alone in a darkened living room, the storm raging outside her windows, she made a promise to herself after the baby was born. She would confront Alexander directly. No more doubts or uncertainties. She wanted the truth, whether it shattered her heart or not. For Alexander, this single oversight for getting his pregnant wife's birthday would prove to be the first domino in a cascade of devastating consequences. The morning after Catherine's forgotten birthday, the storm had finally abated, but the atmosphere within the Van Doren mansion remained suffused with tension. Catherine woke up feeling numb. She hadn't slept well. Every time she closed her eyes, memories of happier birthdays flooded her consciousness. She remembered how Alexander once surprised her with a hot air balloon ride, how he serenaded her on a whim. Now, that seemed like another lifetime. She mustered the courage to confront him, but found the master bedroom empty. In his usual spot on the nightstand, Alexander's phone was missing. So was he. Instead, she found a terse note, had an early meeting. Don't wait up. The words stung like a slap to the face. Her birthday gone, unacknowledged. She wondered if he even remembered now. By noon, Catherine decided she could no longer ignore her suspicions. She needed proof, solid evidence of Alexander's infidelity. Gathering her resolve, she went to his home office. It was a spacious room, lined with dark wooden shelves and encyclopedias of business strategies, with a large mahogany desk dominating the center. In that desk was a locked drawer she'd seen him open a few times, always discreetly. Her heart pounded as she rifled through his keys until she found the small one that fit. The drawer clicked open to reveal a stack of documents. Nestled among them was a small black journal with handwritten notes and receipts tucked into the pages. She flipped through quickly, eyes widening at what she saw, travel itineraries to luxury hotels. She had never stayed in with him. Designer shopping receipts for items far too intimate to be for business associates. And pictures. Selfies he'd taken with Anastasia in fancy restaurants, at art exhibits, and once on a yacht, each one capturing their secret world. Catherine's breath caught in her throat as she studied the woman in the photos. Anastasia was stunning everything. Catherine had once been, perhaps. But it wasn't just jealousy that roiled in Catherine's gut. It was betrayal, heartbreak, and a fierce determination. She now had confirmation of her husband's double life. Tears filled her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not yet. Footsteps in the hallway jolted her, and she hastily shoved everything back into the drawer, locking it. She could barely compose herself when Alexander walked in, a troubled expression on his face. "Kath, what are you doing in here?" he asked, noticing her tremor. She closed her eyes, took a shaky breath, and turned to face him. For a moment, neither spoke. Catherine was torn between accusing him outright and preserving the little dignity she had left. In the end, she said, "We need to talk," her voice steadied by an undercurrent of rage and heartbreak. Alexander looked uneasy. "Yes, we do, but maybe later. I have important calls." "Important calls?" she echoed, her voice edged with anger. "What about my birthday, Alexander? Or does that not matter anymore?" He seemed genuinely startled, a flash of realization crossing his face. "Catherine, I'm sorry. It slipped my mind with all the chaos at work. One." She held up a hand, cutting him off. "Don't. Just don't. We'll talk tonight." she said, her voice quivering with hurt, but also steeled by knowledge. With that, she brushed past him, leaving Alexander to grapple with the first stirrings of real guilt. What neither of them could predict was just how explosive that evening's conversation would be and how its repercussions would extend far beyond the walls of their mansion. Night descended on Westbridge Hills with a certain heaviness, as if the air itself braced for an impending confrontation. Catherine spent the day locked in a mental tug-of-war. Her heart wept for the marriage she once had, yet her mind screamed for answers, resolution, no matter how painful it might be. By the time Alexander returned home, she was waiting in the living room, perched on the edge of the couch like a sentinel. The room was awash in the dim glow of a single lamp, casting dramatic shadows on the walls. Catherine's expression was resolute, her posture poised. "We talk now," she said firmly the moment he stepped inside. Alexander set down his briefcase and loosened his tie, looking as though he'd rather be anywhere else. But there was no escaping. Not this time. Catherine wasted no time. She retrieved the stack of incriminating documents and photographs from the desk drawer, laying them out on the coffee table like evidence in a courtroom. "Do you want to explain these?" she asked, her voice heartbreakingly calm. Alexander froze, color draining from his face. He glanced at the images of him and Anastasia, the receipts, the notes scrawled in the little black journal. Lies dangled on the tip of his tongue, but he could no longer pretend. "Catherine, who is she?" Catherine's voice cracked, just enough to reveal her underlying pain. He ran a hand through his hair, pacing the room. "Her name is Anastasia Pierce. We met some months ago." It was never supposed to go this far. Catherine's eyes glistened with tears she fought to hold back. "But it did. And you chose her over your own wife, your pregnant wife. Why, Alexander?" She waited, but no meaningful excuse came. "Have you even considered the stress you're putting on me, on our child?" Alexander pinched the bridge of his nose, shame mingling with frustration. "Catherine, I'm sorry. My life. It felt like it was missing something. I couldn't control it. Everything just spiraled. Missing something," Catherine repeated, her voice choked with emotion. "We built a life together, and I'm carrying your child. And you say you're missing something?" He had no answer that would satisfy her. The room reverberated with silence until Catherine finally spoke again. "You need to decide, Alexander. I'm not going to share you with anyone. If you want this marriage, if you want to be a father, you have to cut her out of your life. Completely." Alexander stared at the floor, weighed down by 1,000 unspoken fears. He thought of Anastasia's piercing green eyes, her effervescent laughter, the sense of forbidden freedom she awakened in him. But he also thought of Catherine's steady heart, her unwavering love, and the unborn child he had a duty to protect. The decision was monstrous, yet also straightforward. Family or mistress? "I need time," he whispered finally, afraid to look Catherine in the eye. "You have until tomorrow," she said, not unkindly. "Otherwise, I'll do what I have to do for myself and for this baby." Alexander nodded, the gravity of her words crashing over him. He turned away, unable to face the devastation etched on her features. As he climbed the grand staircase to their bedroom, he felt as though each step carried him closer to a decision that would reshape his life forever. But fate, as it often does, had other, more dramatic plans in store. Anastasia Pierce had reached her breaking point. The night before, she and Alexander had exchanged tense text messages. His vague reassurances did little to calm her growing apprehension. A new fear clutched at her heart. What if Alexander never truly intended to leave Catherine? What if all his promises were just a mirage, dangling before her to keep her interested while he juggled a double life? In a moment of reckless determination, Anastasia decided to force Alexander's hand. She dressed in a tailored navy trench coat, stepping out into the drizzly morning air, and hailed a taxi to Westbridge Hills. The journey felt eternal. Nervous energy sparked in her chest as the suburban scenery glided by a realm of manicured lawns and million-dollar estates. So quiet, it was almost unnerving. She clutched her phone, ignoring a series of missed calls from Alexander. Let him worry, she thought grimly. Arriving at the Van Doren mansion, she stepped out onto the gravel driveway, her heels crunching ominously. The mansion loomed before her, a testament to the wealth and power that Alexander commanded. If he truly wanted a life with her, he had to be honest. She squared her shoulders and marched to the front door, ringing the bell with a steely determination. It was Catherine who opened it. The two women locked eyes for a moment. Catherine, heavily pregnant, was taken aback by the visitor's striking beauty and unwavering stare. Recognition dawned on her face. She'd seen that face in the photos. Instantly, her heart pounded like a war drum. Anastasia Pierce, the woman, introduced herself, barely managing the politeness to offer a tight, thin-lipped smile. "I'm here to see Alexander." Catherine inhaled a trembling breath. So this was the woman who had disrupted her life. Anger roiled beneath her outward composure. "Alexander isn't home," Catherine said icily, stepping aside to block any attempt of entry. "Then I'll wait," Anastasia replied, her voice resolute. She took a daring step forward, as if challenging Catherine to stop her. The tension in the foyer was suffocating. Catherine's fists clenched involuntarily. "You have no right to be here," she hissed. "You've already caused enough harm." Anastasia met her gaze, anger flaring in her emerald eyes. "Listen, Catherine," she said, her tone unyielding. "I know this is painful, but I'm not the only one responsible. Alexander led me on. He promised me." Catherine cut her off, voice quavering with a mix of rage and despair. "Promised you what? A life together? A future? And what about my future? Our child's future?" In that moment, both women realized how intricately their fates had become entwined by one man's lies. The confrontation escalated into a chaotic exchange of accusations and heartbreak, culminating in a stark ultimatum from Anastasia: "If Alexander doesn't choose me, I'll make sure everyone knows what kind of man he really is." Before Catherine could respond, headlights swept over the driveway as Alexander's car pulled in. He stepped out, shock painted all over his face at the sight of the two women. His mistress and his wife both pregnant, with questions, accusations, demands stood mere feet apart. And he was the linchpin in this entire, spiraling disaster. Little did Alexander realize the damage was already done, and that destiny had yet another cruel twist waiting around the corner. The wind picked up again as storm clouds gathered above Westbridge Hills, painting the sky a deep grey. Alexander hurried to the front steps, his heart pounding from the moment he recognized Anastasia's sleek figure standing face to face with Catherine. "Alexander," Anastasia said stiffly, hands balled at her sides. Her eyes flicked to Catherine's pregnant belly, then back to him. "We need to talk." "Inside," Catherine added, her voice cold. "Now." Alexander could scarcely breathe under the weight of their combined fury. He led them to the living room, a space usually reserved for elegant gatherings and polite conversation. Today, it felt like the stage for a tragic showdown. The air crackled with tension as they stood in a triangle, Catherine by the grand piano, Anastasia near the fireplace, and Alexander between them, his expression etched with desperation. He turned to Anastasia first. "What are you doing here? This is my home. You can't just—" She cut him off with a raised hand. "Don't you dare scold me. You've been avoiding me, dodging my questions. You promised me a life, a future. I deserve an explanation." Catherine's gaze was laser-focused on Alexander. "So it's true. She came to stake her claim in our home, Alexander." Her voice trembled with unmasked hurt. "Did you even think about what this would do to me? To your child?" Alexander's head swiveled from one to the other, panic shining in his eyes. "Catherine, Anastasia, this got out of control. I never wanted to hurt either of you. Yet here we are." Anastasia fired back. "Stop pretending you're some helpless bystander. You orchestrated this. You promised me a fresh start, and now you're looking at me like I'm a stranger." Silence smothered the room. Catherine found her breath uneven, anxiety pressing down on her like a vise. She spoke slowly, trying to maintain composure. "You told me last night you needed time. Well, time's up. Choose now, Alexander. Tell her to leave and cut ties for good, or we're done." The ultimatum hung in the air, a loaded gun aimed at the fragile life he'd built. Alexander looked at Anastasia, whose jaw was set in defiance. Then he turned to Catherine, her eyes dark with betrayal, one hand protectively resting on her belly. A swirl of images raced through his mind. The vow he'd taken with Catherine, the child that was mere weeks away from coming into the world, the nights of stolen passion with Anastasia, the promises he'd made in whispered hushes. His throat felt dry as desert sand. He paused, swallowed. "I choose Catherine. This is my family. I can't abandon my wife and our baby." Anastasia recoiled as though slapped. "You're making a mistake," she said, voice shaking. "You told me you were unhappy, that you wanted out." Alexander closed his eyes. Maybe I said things in the heat of the moment, but it's over. We're done, Anastasia." Tears welled in Anastasia's eyes. Part of her had expected this answer, but hearing it aloud shattered her illusions. She shot Catherine a look that was equal parts fury and sorrow. "You think you've won?" she said in a voice strangled by heartbreak. "He'll do it again. Men like Alexander never change." With that, she spun on her heel and headed for the door, leaving Alexander and Catherine in the hush of aftermath. But even as the door slammed shut, Catherine could not find relief. Instead, a deep, unsettling dread settled in her chest. Something in Anastasia's parting words, in her aura of steely resolve, warned that this was far from over. In the days that followed, Alexander tried to make amends, but Catherine's trust had been severely eroded. She went through the motions, allowing him to accompany her to doctor appointments, letting him place a comforting hand on her shoulder, but he could sense the emotional chasm that now divided them. The staff at the mansion tried to maintain a veneer of normalcy, but whispers circulated. Servants exchanged nervous glances. The air felt fraught with unspoken truths and dangerous secrets. For Alexander, guilt was a relentless spectre. He took extended leaves from his work, passing off responsibilities to his junior partners so he could focus on repairing his marriage. But whenever Catherine caught him texting on his phone, her face would darken, consumed by the bitter memory of his betrayal. Sensing her suspicion, Alexander tried to distance himself from anything that might link him back to Anastasia. He blocked her number, deleted their photos, and tried to bury every trace of her existence. But forgetting is often easier said than done. Meanwhile, Anastasia seethed in her small condo across town, nursing the wounds of rejection. She ruminated over every promise Alexander had made, every glance, every caress. Had it all been a lie? Or had Catherine's pregnancy forced him into a corner he couldn't escape? Yet she refused to accept that her relationship with Alexander was truly finished. She told herself that men like him rarely stayed in the straight and narrow for long. All she needed was a moment, a single slip-up, to wedge herself back into his life, or at least to exact some measure of revenge for the heartbreak. On a particularly sleepless night, she scrolled through her phone, pausing at a saved voicemail from Alexander. Left weeks ago. His voice was low, seductive, sweet as honey. "You're my shining star, Anna. I can't wait to build the life we've been dreaming about." She replayed it several times, tears of rage blurring her vision. Finally, with trembling fingers, she forwarded the voicemail to Catherine's email address, found on the Van Doren Foundation's official website. No note, no explanation, just raw evidence of Alexander's duplicity. Let Catherine decide how to interpret it. When Catherine woke the next morning, she found the voicemail in her inbox. Listening to it felt like ripping open barely healed wounds. She stared at her phone in disbelief, the numbness giving way to anger. Alexander was still asleep beside her, oblivious to her discovery. She wanted to wake him, to scream, to demand why he had ever said those words. But she fought the urge. Instead, she slipped out of bed and walked to the nursery. The pastel walls, the mobile gently spinning over the crib, all reminded her of what was at stake, her baby's future. Sighing, she sank into the rocking chair, the phone screen casting a pale glow in the dim morning light. She was tired physically, emotionally, spiritually, tired of feeling powerless. A plan began to form in her mind. If Alexander had indeed ended things, then Anastasia's meddling might be an act of desperation. But if he was lying, Catherine intended to find out. No more half measures. She was determined to lay this entire mess bare, consequences be damned. A new storm system rolled over the coast, lightning slicing the sky in eerie flashes. The thunder echoed like a premonition of chaos yet to come. Catherine decided she couldn't wait any longer. She approached Alexander in his study, face solemn, heart pounding. "We need to talk," she said, her voice devoid of the softness he once loved. The man across from her looked fatigued, but she showed little sympathy. He nodded, shutting his laptop. "What is it, Kath?" She held up her phone, her gaze cold. "Anastasia forwarded me a voicemail. From you." Alexander's face tightened, a flicker of panic in his eyes. "Catherine, that's old. Before I decided to fix things with you, I swear. Then why is she sending it now?" Catherine demanded, forcing her rising anger down. "Are you still in contact?" "No," he said firmly. "I told you. I ended it. She won't leave me alone. She's upset." Catherine wanted to believe him, but trust had become a fragile concept in her life. "I'm giving you one chance to prove you're telling the truth," she said. "Meet with Anastasia face to face. Make it clear, once and for all, that she has no place in our lives. That might be the only way she'll stop harassing us." Alexander swallowed hard. He imagined Anastasia's pleading eyes, the swirl of unspoken sorrow between them. But Catherine was right. There was no other way to end this cleanly. "Fine," he said, his voice tinged with resignation. "I'll do it. On one condition, you come with me. Let there be no confusion." Catherine paused. The idea of confronting her husband's mistress again filled her with dread, but perhaps this was the closure they needed. "All right," she agreed quietly. "We'll do it together." That evening, a meeting was arranged at a neutral location, a private lounge in a boutique hotel. Downtown, quiet enough for discreet conversation. Rain hammered against the windows as the trio converged. Anastasia arrived first, nursing a glass of wine at a corner table. Catherine and Alexander appeared moments later, side by side but maintaining a formal distance. Alexander wasted no time. "Anna," he said tightly, "this needs to end. We're done. I'm choosing my family." Anastasia's eyes flickered with wounded pride. She made a visible effort to remain composed, though her voice quivered. "Are you sure, Alex? After everything we shared?" Catherine stiffened, her arms crossed. "He's sure," she cut in, refusing to be intimidated. "We both are." The lounge was nearly empty, their voices resonating with a tense intimacy. Anastasia inhaled sharply, as if grappling with her next words. "Fine," she said, forcing a shrug. "But I didn't come here to beg. I came to warn you. If you think I'm going to disappear quietly, you're mistaken." Lightning illuminated the windows, revealing streaks of rain that smeared the night sky. Catherine's heart hammered. "What are you talking about?" Anastasia leaned forward, her green eyes narrowing. "Alexander promised me more than just sweet words. He made business deals in my name, gave me insider information. It's all documented, Catherine. I could ruin him or your precious Van Doren name if I wanted to. Alexander paled. Anna, you wouldn't, he whispered, realizing the depth of the betrayal he'd enabled. A bitter smile tugged at Anastasia's lips. Don't corner a wounded animal, darling. You never know how vicious it might become. The flash of lightning outside was blinding, followed by a crack of thunder so loud it rattled the chandelier overhead. In that moment, all pretense of civility shattered, and Catherine realized that the storms raging within their lives were far from over. The next morning brought a jarring sense of urgency. Catherine woke early, anxiety dancing across her heart. She paced the corridors of the Van Doren mansion, imagining the headlines if Anastasia unleashed her secrets. Alexander's shady dealings might become a public spectacle, and their child would be born into a maelstrom of scandal. She recalled every charity event, every press conference, every philanthropic project that bore the Van Doren name. Reputations could be destroyed in a single headline, but her concerns went beyond image. She feared for Alexander's mental state. Though she resented him for his betrayal, she also recognized that his world had been built on high stakes and risk-taking. If everything came crashing down, would he survive the fall? Meanwhile, Alexander was consumed with damage control. He made frantic calls to his attorneys, his business associates, even calling in favors from local politicians. All the while, he refused to look Catherine in the eye, as if the shame of his affair and the fear of public ruin were more than he could bear. Just when Catherine thought she'd seen the worst, a stern knock sounded at the mansion's front door. A courier arrived with a sealed envelope addressed to Alexander. Inside, they found copies of files implicating him in insider trading and shady property acquisitions documents that bore Anastasia's name in key places. A handwritten note in flamboyant cursive was included. Decide how this ends, AP. Alexander sank into a leather armchair, burying his face in his hands. She's not bluffing, he whispered, voice trembling. I gave her access to some deals. She knows everything. Catherine's mind whirled. She felt a rush of anger, betrayal, and dread. Why, Alex? Why risk everything we've built? He looked up at her, hollow-eyed. Because I thought I was invincible, unstoppable. I got caught up in the thrill of it all. Now it's over. Catherine inhaled sharply, feeling a wave of dizziness. She pressed a hand to her belly, steadying herself. The baby was due any day now, and she realized she needed to protect herself and their child. We can't let her blackmail us, she said resolutely. We have to go to the authorities or fight this head-on, or... The conversation was interrupted by her sudden gasp. A sharp pain rippled through her abdomen, and she doubled over. Alexander rushed to her side, eyes flaring in alarm. What's wrong? My water broke, Catherine managed between labored breaths. It's time. Panic surged through Alexander. Everything else, Anastasia, the documents, the scandal became secondary. He scooped Catherine into his arms, shouting for the driver to bring the car around. Within minutes, they were racing to the hospital, the tension of the mansion left behind, replaced by a new fear that Catherine and the baby might face complications. Yet even as they sped through the rain-slicked streets, one thought pulsed in Catherine's mind. Anastasia's threat still loomed, and nothing, not even the miracle of birth, could fully eclipse the darkness that had infiltrated their lives. She clung to Alexander's hand, uncertain whether this child's birth would bring them together or tear them apart once and for all. The drive to Westbridge Hills Medical Center felt like a fever dream for Catherine. Every bump in the road sent a jolt of pain through her abdomen, and the contractions were coming fast, each wave sharper than the last. Alexander gripped the steering wheel with knuckles turned white, adrenaline coursing through his veins. Their previous worries, Anastasia's blackmail, the precarious business deals, receded in the urgency of impending parenthood. Upon arrival, nurses quickly wheeled Catherine into a private labor suite, and Alexander followed close behind. Alarms beeped softly in the background, the fluorescent lights lending the corridor a harsh brightness that only amplified Catherine's vulnerability. A flurry of medical staff attended her, checking vitals, hooking her up to monitors that tracked the baby's heartbeat. The rhythm was strong, steady, a reassuring sign that even amid this chaos, new life persisted. Alexander hovered at the bedside, stroking Catherine's hair as she breathed through the contractions. Tears shimmered in his eyes. "I'm sorry," he whispered, so quietly that she almost didn't hear. "I'm sorry for everything." Catherine looked into his face, searching for sincerity. Despite the pain, she managed a nod, acknowledging at least the sincerity of the moment, if not full forgiveness just yet. "Let's get through this first," she murmured, her voice tight with discomfort. And so began the longest hours of their lives. Each contraction felt like a crescendo, Catherine's breathing ragged as she tried to focus on the coaching from the obstetrician. Alexander offered her ice chips, whispered encouragement, and rubbed her back. In those moments, the memory of Anastasia and the documents receded, replaced by an all-consuming devotion to bringing their child into the world safely. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the doctor announced it was time for Catherine to push. She summoned every ounce of strength in her body, the pressure building to an almost unbearable peak. Lightning flashed outside the hospital windows, thunder rolling in a dramatic underscore to the miracle and madness of the evening. Alexander held her hand, pressing his forehead against hers, tears running down both their cheeks. One final push, and the room filled with the piercing cry of a newborn. Catherine collapsed back against the pillows, gasping. The world slowed as a nurse carefully wrapped the tiny, squirming infant in a soft blanket, then placed the baby in Catherine's arms. "It's a girl," the nurse announced, smiling warmly. The baby's cries softened as she felt her mother's warmth and her father's trembling hand gently stroking her cheek. In that moment, Catherine and Alexander locked eyes. A silent understanding passed between them, a recognition that, despite the betrayals and lies, they had created something precious. For the first time in months, hope flickered in Catherine's chest, even if it was fragile and overshadowed by the storms awaiting them outside the hospital walls. For a brief time, the world paused. Friends and family, those who hadn't already distanced themselves, sent congratulations. Nurses praised the baby's health. The newborn slept peacefully in a bassinet beside Catherine's bed, and Alexander found himself watching in awe, as if seeing true beauty for the first time. But reality waited, patient and unrelenting. On the second day of Catherine's hospital stay, Alexander stepped out to take a call from his lawyer. It was confirmed. Anastasia had indeed sent copies of incriminating documents to various media outlets, all set to publish unless Alexander met her demands. She wanted a substantial sum of money, enough to set her up for life, and a public apology that admitted no wrongdoing on her part but tarnished his own credibility. Alexander felt the walls closing in. He could pay her off, but it wouldn't end the speculation or the rumors. Worse, it would deplete his liquidity at a critical moment, possibly sabotaging the Charleston development deal. On the other hand, if he refused, he risked being charged with insider trading, an offense that could ruin him financially and legally. His mind reeled as he stared at the sterile hospital corridor, where the faint smell of antiseptic mingled with his own cold sweat. Returning to Catherine's side, he found her resting, the baby swaddled in her arms. He hesitated, torn between burdening her and wanting to share the weight. Guilt gnawed at him. Eventually, he told her everything. Catherine's first reaction was shock, followed swiftly by anger. But as she looked down at her sleeping daughter, a fierce, protective instinct overshadowed all else. We can't let her destroy this family, she said firmly. You need to fight back, but do it the right way. Alexander nodded, tears threatening to betray his composure. I don't know how, he admitted. The law is on her side if she has proof. Catherine set her jaw. Then we need to find proof that she manipulated you too. Something that shows she isn't an innocent victim. Doesn't she have any skeletons in her closet? A spark of possibility flickered in Alexander's eyes. Anastasia had once boasted about bending rules in her art curation business, forging documents to smuggle rare artifacts. Could that be leveraged? He wasn't sure. Still, the notion of exposing Anastasia's wrongdoing carried its own risks and moral dilemmas. Desperate times call for desperate measures. Alexander reached out to an old acquaintance, Daniel Remington, a tech-savvy investor who owed him a favor from their early days in real estate. Daniel was known for keeping hush-hush about grey area tasks, often skirting legal lines to get what he needed. Alexander felt a wave of distaste for resorting to such alliances, but the alternative was ruin. They met in a dimly lit parking garage beneath a high-rise downtown, reminiscent of a scene from a spy thriller. Rain dripped from overhead pipes, creating puddles that reflected the fluorescent glow of flickering lights. You've really stepped in it this time, haven't you, Van Doren? Daniel said, leaning against a concrete pillar, arms folded. Alexander exhaled heavily. I need to protect my family, Dan. I messed up. Help me fix it. With a wry smile, Daniel nodded. I'll do what I can. Get me her phone number, any email addresses, social media handles, anything. I'll see if there's something we can use to negotiate. Alexander handed over a small piece of paper with Anastasia's details. Whatever you find, keep it quiet. I don't want to push her into a corner so badly that she lashes out. She's capable of anything right now. Daniel's eyes gleamed. Understood. Back at the mansion, Catherine sat in the nursery, feeding their daughter, whom they had named Elizabeth Grace Van Doren. The baby was a marvel, a tiny bundle of innocence and potential. Every coo and yawn tugged at Catherine's heart, reminding her of the life she wanted to protect, a life free from the shadow of scandal and betrayal. Alexander paced the hallway, phone in hand, awaiting Daniel's call. Eventually, it came. Daniel's voice crackled through the line. I've found something. Anastasia had some questionable dealings with a private collector overseas. There might be grounds for accusing her of fraud or smuggling. The details are fuzzy, but the mere threat of exposing this might make her back off. Relief coursed through Alexander, though it was tainted by the bitterness of how low he was willing to sink. All right, draft a statement. Send it to her. Make it clear that if she releases anything about me, I'll release what you found about her. Let's see if she calls our bluff. An uneasy truce settled over the Van Doren household as they waited for Anastasia's response. Days dragged on without any new media reports or blackmail messages. Catherine clung to hope, her focus shifting to Elizabeth's well-being. She began to imagine a future, maybe a smaller house, a calmer life. She'd even considered renting an apartment somewhere far away if the scandal erupted, determined to shield Elizabeth from the fallout. One afternoon, Catherine was in the living room, rocking Elizabeth in her arms while Alexander scrolled nervously through emails. Suddenly, his phone buzzed. A message from Anastasia flashed across the screen. You think you've outsmarted me? I'm not giving up that easily. Let's negotiate. Alexander glanced at Catherine. She nodded, silently urging him to handle the situation carefully. Responding promptly, Alexander typed, We both have damaging information. Let's end this without mutual destruction. What do you want? A minute passed, felt like an eternity before Anastasia's next message arrived. A sum of money. Enough to cover damages and lost opportunities. Once I have it, I disappear. No more threats. Bile rose in Alexander's throat. He typed through gritted teeth, where and when. She shot back a location, a chic cafe in the city, and a time, tomorrow afternoon. Alexander's mind churned. Meeting in public reduced the risk of confrontation, but it also meant there'd be watchful eyes. He'd have to be cautious. Catherine insisted on coming along, but Alexander shook his head. We can't risk that. If we push her too hard, she might become vindictive again. Reluctantly, Catherine agreed, but she insisted on a safeguard. Alexander would wear a small recording device, courtesy of Daniel's connections, to capture any incriminating admissions. If Anastasia tried to renege or twist the agreement, they'd have tangible evidence to protect themselves. The next day arrived, overcast and drizzling. Alexander parked a few blocks from the cafe, briefcase in hand. Inside the case was a fraction of the money Anastasia demanded, with a promise of the rest to be wired to an account once she confirmed the destruction of all incriminating documents. Daniel lurked in a nearby car, ready to call the police if things went sideways. Alexander's heart hammered as he stepped inside. Anastasia was seated in a corner booth, wearing large sunglasses despite the grey day. She signaled him over, her smile a precarious blend of regret and defiance. "Busy day?" she asked, voice dripping with irony. Alexander ignored the small talk and placed the briefcase on the table. "Here's your partial payment. You'll get the rest when I have proof you've deleted every file and retracted every statement." Anastasia removed her sunglasses, revealing reddened eyes that hinted at sleepless nights. "You really believe I wanted it to come to this, Alexander? I loved you." A pang of something, guilt, pity, flickered across his face. "We both made mistakes, but you went too far, Anna. Blackmail isn't love." She sighed, tears threatening but never quite falling. "I just wanted the life you promised. Everything else was me lashing out." He slid a small flash drive across the table. "This contains evidence of your dealings abroad. Let this serve as a reminder not to cross me again." Her gaze hardened, and for a moment Alexander wondered if she might cause a scene. Instead, she took the flash drive, exhaling sharply. "Fine, I'll wipe the files, retract my leaks. But if you ever breathe a word about my dealings, I'll have my own backup plan. Do we understand each other?" Alexander nodded. The tension between them was suffocating, heavy with the ghosts of what might have been. With trembling hands, Anastasia unzipped the briefcase, checking the cash. Then she stood up, smoothing her coat. "You win, Alex. But trust me, life doesn't always hand out second chances. Whatever problems you had in your marriage, fix them, or you'll end up right back here." She brushed past him, leaving a faint trace of perfume in her wake. Outside, the drizzle had intensified into a steady rain. Alexander watched her disappear into the grey cityscape, a swirl of emotions too tangled to name. Part of him felt relief, another part sadness, and yet another part an unshakable sense of foreboding. Had he truly shut the door on this chapter, or had he merely postponed a worse disaster? Back in Westbridge Hills, Catherine waited anxiously by the fireplace, Elizabeth asleep in her nursery. When Alexander finally returned, drenched from the rain, she saw the exhaustion etched in every line on his face. Without speaking, he sank onto the sofa beside her. The crackling fire cast flickering shadows on the walls, as if echoing the turbulent shadows that still haunted them. "It's done," he said quietly. "She'll back off." Catherine searched his face for reassurance. "And the evidence? She'll destroy it?" He nodded, though not entirely convincingly. "That's what she agreed to." Reaching out, he took her hand, his voice trembling slightly. "Catherine, I know I've hurt you deeply. I know sorry doesn't fix everything, but I want to try. For Elizabeth, for us. I promise you, I'm finished with lies." She studied him for a long moment, her eyes reflecting both the pain of betrayal and the flicker of renewed hope. Finally, she spoke, her voice steady. "Then we'll try. We'll go to therapy. rebuild trust one day at a time. But I won't ever go back to how things were, Alexander. Our daughter deserves better than that. He nodded fervently. She does. We all do. In the weeks that followed, life took on a new texture, cautious, subdued, but not without glimmers of promise. The public scandal never materialized. The media moved on to the next sensation, and Alexander's lawyers quietly settled any lingering legal concerns behind closed doors. The Charleston deal pulled through, albeit at a tighter margin, and Alexander scaled back his ambitions. Realizing he could no longer juggle illusions and deception with the role of husband and father, Catherine found solace in motherhood, bonding with Elizabeth in the nursery she had lovingly designed. She began writing poetry again, using her pen as a means to process the swirl of emotions. Piece by piece, the Van Doren mansion shifted from a battleground of secrets into a haven where forgiveness might just take root. They often reflected on the darkest hours, the forgotten birthday that set everything in motion, the confrontation with Anastasia at the mansion, the heartbreak that almost tore them apart. Yet through sheer tenacity and a baby's gentle laughter, they found the resolve to keep moving forward. A fragile peace had settled over their lives, but they knew it would take endless care to maintain. For Catherine, each dawn was a chance to decide anew whether to trust Alexander, to trust herself, and to trust in the future of their family. For Alexander, every kiss he placed on Elizabeth's forehead reminded him of the responsibility he bore, the vow he'd nearly broken beyond repair. "Let's make this work," Catherine would say, gazing at their daughter curled in her crib. "Yes," Alexander would echo, voice hushed with humility. "Let's make it work." And in that quiet promise, day by day, they chose each other, determined to cling to the precious gift of life that bound them together even after almost losing it all. And so ends the turbulent tale of Alexander and Catherine Van Doren, a cautionary reminder that even the wealthy cannot buy freedom from the consequences of betrayal. In the wake of heartbreak and near disaster, they stand at a crossroads where forgiveness is an everyday choice, and trust is rebuilt brick by painstaking brick. Anastasia's legacy haunts them still, a reminder of how quickly desire and deceit can unravel a life of apparent perfection. Yet in the fragile laughter of a newborn baby, Alexander and Catherine have found a reason to hope, a testament to the power of second chances. If you've been riveted by this real-life drama, please like, share, and subscribe to this channel for more stories that peel back the layers of human desire, ambition, and redemption. Share your thoughts in the comments. Do you believe a marriage can truly be saved after such betrayal? Let's keep the conversation going.